Alyssa looked at her husband as if trying to see the man she had once married. When had he become such a stranger? Or maybe he had always been that way and she just hadn't noticed. But now, none of that mattered. "Kevin, if we're buying an apartment, it has to be in both our names," she said, keeping her voice steady. "Otherwise, I'm taking my share of the money." "We both saved up. We even sold my grandmother's condo. That means I actually contributed more than you. But you're going to be the only one on the title." Kevin rolled his eyes in frustration and shrugged. "Alyssa, you're so materialistic. What difference does it make whose name is on it? We're a family. Keeping tabs on who gave what is just wrong. We're one unit, aren't we?" Alyssa stayed quiet, her knuckles white from how tightly she clenched her hands. She pressed her lips together, trying to maintain control. "If it really doesn't matter, then why should the apartment be in your name?" she asked, watching his reaction closely. Kevin froze, as if he didn't quite understand what she had just said. "Because I want it that way," he blurted out finally. "The man is the head of the house." Alyssa crossed her arms. Once, she would have accepted his decisions in silence, buried her own desires, believed in his authoritative "I know better," but now that just seemed absurd. "Kevin, enough. This is the modern world. Either the apartment is in both our names or we're not buying it." He tried to interject, but she didn't let him. "And by the way, maybe you could start saving too. It wouldn't kill you to skip your evening beers for a month or two." His eyes widened in shock. For 10 years, Alyssa had been quiet, obedient, almost submissive. And now, out of nowhere, she was pushing back. He clenched his jaw. He was sure this was Nadine's doing. Kevin couldn't stand Nadine. She was blunt, unafraid of uncomfortable questions, and always looked at him like he was a bad joke. This story was submitted by a subscriber. Share your own stories in the comments and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new ones. A heavy silence settled over the house. Alyssa sat by the window, staring at the darkening horizon. Lately, the thought that their marriage was just a facade visited her more and more often. Kevin came home later and later, and his excuses grew increasingly flimsy. She wasn't stupid. She knew there was someone else, but she didn't know what to do about it. One day she shared her worries with a friend. "Nadine, what will I do if Kevin leaves? How do I go on with my life?" Her voice trembled. Nadine only shrugged, looking at Alyssa with a hint of irony. "You're not really living right now. You're just existing. Kevin's always only thought about himself. You're working 2 jobs, making more money than him, and he acts like you should be thanking him. So what do you owe him exactly?" "He's my husband," Alyssa said softly, looking down. "Husband?" Nadine scoffed. "When's the last time he did anything for you? Gave you flowers? Showed he cared?" Alyssa stayed quiet. She already knew the answer. "Exactly. He doesn't care. And if you stop being useful to him tomorrow, he'll throw you out like nothing." Nadine's words stuck with her. Alyssa remembered who she used to be. Confident, vibrant, determined. She used to feel like she could move mountains. Now she was a shadow of that woman. Meanwhile, Kevin felt completely in control. Alyssa was convenient, quiet, supportive, always ready to adapt. He truly believed he had everything under control. Even when she insisted that the apartment be in both their names, he agreed, though deep down, he held a grudge. The truth was, Kevin had been living a double life for some time. He had started seeing a younger, flashier woman, someone who demanded gifts, dinners out, and weekend getaways. His debts were piling up, and he kept telling himself it was just temporary. All that mattered was keeping Alyssa compliant. Time passed, and they bought the apartment. It was spacious, full of light, with big windows, a source of pride for Kevin. He walked around the place like he'd conquered something. But then one day, Alyssa brought up something new. "Kevin, I think it's time we start talking about having a baby," she said casually, almost offhand. He turned to her like she had just said something outrageous. "Are you out of your mind? Look at these walls. We haven't even finished furnishing the place, and now you're talking about kids." Alyssa went silent, a hollow feeling spreading through her chest. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was filled with exhaustion. "You just never want children, do you?" Kevin chuckled dismissively, not even bothering to argue. A year went by. The apartment slowly filled with cozy touches, but happiness never came. Kevin stayed out more often. He was becoming harsher, and the silence that filled their evenings started to weigh on Alyssa like a stone. Then one night, Kevin came home late and dropped a bomb. "I'm leaving. I want you out. I need the apartment." Alyssa looked at him, searching his face for even a trace of the man he used to be, but there was nothing left. "That's your choice, Kevin, but I'm not going anywhere. This is my apartment too." He stood there in the middle of the room, blinking in disbelief. "You've got no one. You'll always be alone. You're supposed to do what I say." Alyssa took a step closer and looked him right in the eyes. "Those are your words, and I'm done listening to them. Take your share, file for divorce, do whatever you want. The rest, it's not your concern anymore." Her voice was calm, her gaze icy. Kevin realized she meant every word, but it was too late to respond. Alyssa walked out, leaving him in stunned silence. For the first time in years, she felt strong. Months passed after Alyssa told Kevin she wasn't leaving. He decided to let it sit for a while, confident that he'd eventually find a way to force her out. He thought her newfound strength was just a phase, something that would fade with time. But every day, Alyssa became more distant and composed. Her silence started to irritate him. She didn't even flinch anymore when he lost his temper. She barely looked up. Her mind seemed somewhere far away. Even the apartment, once his pride, now felt unfamiliar. He no longer felt like the king of his castle. More than anything, he just wanted things to go back to how they used to be. It ate at him that Alyssa no longer begged, no longer tried to smooth things over, no longer ran after him. Then one night he came home even later than usual, almost 3 in the morning. The hallway was dark, but he could hear someone quietly breathing. Alyssa didn't get up to reheat his dinner like she used to. She didn't even come out of the bedroom. She used to wait up for him, like a loyal dog. But now he felt like an intruder in his own home. The realization hit him like a punch in the gut. What the hell is going on? He thought, panicking. The next day, he decided to go all in. "Alyssa," he said, trying hard to keep his irritation in check, "I found a buyer for my share of the apartment." She looked at him over her shoulder, calmly folding laundry. Kevin froze. He had expected tears, a meltdown, maybe even her begging him to reconsider. But the indifference in her face hit harder than any insult. "Tomorrow I'm signing the papers. You'll have to move out. The new owner can decide what to do with you." Alyssa nodded, like he'd just mentioned a change in the weather. But inside she was fighting panic. Kevin's threat wasn't empty. He was perfectly capable of doing exactly what he said. She remembered how he'd once said he'd do anything if it meant profit. The anger boiled inside her, but she couldn't afford to lose control. The next morning, Kevin left early, while Alyssa stayed behind. She couldn't shake the feeling that something unknown was waiting for her. When the front door opened, she instinctively tensed, but it wasn't Kevin. Instead, a tall man stepped into the entryway. He looked around briefly, then, noticing her, took an awkward step forward. "Excuse me, are you Alyssa?" he asked, his voice a bit unsure. She stood up, feeling slightly dizzy. "Yes. And you are?" "Eugene," he said, offering a polite nod. "I bought half of this apartment. I'm hoping we can find a way to live here peacefully." The evening that followed was strange. Eugene turned out to be reserved, even a little shy, but clearly determined to be respectful. He suggested they sit down and talk about how they'd share the space while they figured out what to do with the apartment long term. "I work out of state most of the year," he explained. "I'll only be here for a few months at a time. The rest of the year, the place is all yours." Alyssa sat at the kitchen table, absent-mindedly flipping through her notebook when she noticed a faint scratch on the surface, a knife mark. This table had been one of the first things she and Kevin had bought when they moved in. Back then, it had symbolized a fresh start. Now, It just looked worn and tired, just like her. Eugene pulled out a grocery bag and quietly started making dinner. Alyssa watched as he moved around the kitchen with ease, noting how naturally he navigated a space that wasn't even his. "You're settling in pretty fast," she remarked, smiling for the first time that evening. Eugene turned, slightly surprised by her lighter tone. "I hope I'm not coming off as an intruder. I just thought I'd do something to ease the tension a bit." Over dinner, Eugene told her he'd been looking for a place in a decent neighborhood for a long time. He admitted he had no idea about her complicated situation with her ex-husband. "I've been through something similar," he added. "That's why I can't stand seeing people get hurt." Alyssa felt unexpectedly vulnerable. She had grown used to keeping her emotions tightly sealed, but his words touched something deep within her. After the meal, they cleared the table in silence, and Eugene, wishing her good night, went to the room he had chosen. Alyssa stayed in the kitchen a while longer, wondering what this strange new living arrangement would bring. For the first time in a long time, she felt calm. Maybe, just maybe, it was the start of something different. The next day, Alyssa felt oddly unsettled. She wasn't sure whether it was Eugene's presence or the realization that this might not be as temporary as she'd first thought. After so many years of living with someone who dictated everything, it was unfamiliar and almost disorienting to be around a person who simply listened. Eugene was quiet, barely noticeable. He got up early, made his bed, washed his coffee mug, and left without a sound. All Alyssa heard was the soft click of the front door behind him. She had to admit, even to herself, it was strange to be around someone so considerate. Kevin had been the exact opposite. His socks ended up everywhere. Dirty dishes could pile up for days in the sink and he never cared. Alyssa had always cleaned up after him in silence, convincing herself these were just small things, not worth a fight. But now, comparing the two, she felt a surprising sense of relief. Later that morning, she went to the kitchen to make coffee, but stopped when she saw a note stuck to the fridge. It was written in large, slightly uneven handwriting. "If you ever want to talk, just write. I'm around. Eugene." Alyssa smiled instinctively. It was simple, polite, and most importantly, without pressure. She took a photo of the note with her phone without even knowing why. A few days went by, and they barely crossed paths. Eugene usually came home late, quietly greeted her, and disappeared into his room. Alyssa tried to figure him out, but couldn't find a reason to start a conversation. It was like there was a quiet tension between them, something unspoken, as if both were waiting for the other to make the first move. Then one evening, she heard a soft knock on her bedroom door. "Alyssa, sorry to bother you. Could you help me with something?" She opened the door, a little surprised. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah," he said, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. "I just can't find one of the pots." Alyssa let out a small laugh. For the first time, she felt like the actual owner of her home again. She walked into the kitchen and immediately spotted the pot on the top shelf. Eugene clearly hadn't thought to check up there. "Here it is," she said, handing it to him. "Want me to show you where everything is?" Eugene smiled as he took it. "I'd appreciate that. I still feel a little out of place." His words made her pause. The truth was, this apartment hadn't felt like home to her in a long time either. Ever since Kevin, even the furniture felt foreign, like it belonged to someone else. But with Eugene standing there, she felt something shift, something that resembled comfort. She gave him a quick tour of the kitchen, pointing out where things were kept. Eugene listened carefully, occasionally throwing in a joke to lighten the mood. Alyssa suddenly realized how easy it was to talk to him, something she hadn't felt in years. After that evening, something between them began to change. Alyssa no longer felt so guarded. Eugene started appearing more often in the shared spaces. One night, he offered to cook dinner, and she agreed. As they prepared the meal together, the conversation flowed naturally. Eugene told her about his job up north, where he worked on a rotational schedule in rough conditions. The harsh environment, he said, had taught him to value simplicity and warmth. Alyssa shared how she and Kevin had moved into the apartment full of hope, only to watch her dreams slowly fade. "Ever think about just walking away and starting over?" Eugene asked as he stirred a pan of sauce. "I have," Alyssa admitted, "but I was scared. It's hard to let go when you've been holding on for so long." Eugene looked at her thoughtfully, but didn't say anything. When dinner was ready, they sat at the table, and Alyssa noticed something unusual. For the first time in years, eating felt like a moment to enjoy, not just another task. Eugene shared funny stories about his co-workers, and Alyssa found herself laughing, really laughing. It was like a breath of fresh air after being buried underground. Then, about a week later, Kevin showed up at the door. He looked annoyed and clearly wasn't expecting a stranger to answer. "Who the hell are you?" he asked, not even trying to hide the hostility. Eugene didn't rush to answer. He calmly looked Kevin up and down, then replied, "I'm Eugene, owner of half this apartment." Kevin opened his mouth to snap back, but froze when Alyssa stepped out of the kitchen. She looked calm, almost detached. "What are you doing here, Kevin?" she asked, her eyes steady. "Just checking in, seeing how things are," he muttered. Alyssa gave a tight smile. "You never really cared about that before. What's changed?" Kevin's temper flared. "Look at you now, all bold. You think you've found someone to protect you?" Eugene, still calm, said, "Maybe we should talk in the kitchen. No need for a scene in the hallway." Kevin clenched his fists, but followed them. In the kitchen, the air grew heavy with tension. Kevin sat down, shooting an irritated glance at Eugene, who quietly poured himself a glass of water. Alyssa stood with her arms crossed. She hadn't seen Kevin like this in a long time, but strangely, she didn't feel afraid anymore. "So, what exactly did you want to talk about?" Alyssa asked, her tone dry, clearly ready for the conversation to end as quickly as possible. Kevin hesitated, seeming to weigh his words, but finally spoke. "I sold my half to Eugene," he said, gesturing casually toward him, "but that doesn't mean I've forgotten how you pushed me out." Eugene watched Kevin calmly, noticing how he tried to come off confident, though his voice trembled slightly with irritation. "Pushed you out?" Alyssa repeated, her eyebrows raised. "Remind me who walked away saying he needed space." Kevin's jaw clenched. Instead of responding to her, he turned back to Eugene. "You know what she's going to do to this apartment? She'll ruin it. Everything she touches turns into a burden." Eugene leaned back in his chair, a neutral smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You really think so? Looks like she's kept the place in pretty good shape to me." Kevin fell silent, clearly caught off guard by the quiet defiance. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not in defense of Alyssa. It felt to him like Eugene was doing it deliberately, trying to humiliate him. The thought only fueled his anger. "You don't know her," Kevin finally muttered. "She talks a big game, but in reality, she's useless." Alyssa opened her mouth to speak, but Eugene beat her to it. "Maybe we shouldn't talk about someone in the third person when they're standing right here. Don't you think that's a little disrespectful?" Kevin shot up from his chair, fists clenched again, ready to launch into another rant, but Alyssa lifted her hand with a tired expression. "That's enough, Kevin." Her voice was steady, sharp. "If you came here hoping to play the hero, it didn't work. Now get out." Kevin froze. It was clear he couldn't believe what he was hearing. In the past, Alyssa always tried to calm things down, always tried to negotiate. But the woman in front of him now was different, stronger, unshaken. "You're going to regret this," he said in a low voice, shaking his head as if in warning. "That's my choice," Alyssa replied, her voice cool and even. Kevin stood there for a few more seconds, then abruptly turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. The tension in the room finally eased. Eugene glanced at Alyssa, concern in his eyes. "You okay?" She nodded, though her hands were still trembling slightly. It took her a moment to process how much that conversation had shaken her, how far she'd come from the person she used to be. "Thank you for not reacting to him," she said at last, sitting down. Eugene shrugged. Guys like that feed on emotion. If you don't give them what they want, they lose interest. Alyssa nodded slowly. He was right. Kevin had always tried to manipulate her through fear or guilt, but today, for the first time, she saw him falter in the face of her calm. I thought that would turn into a long argument, she said quietly. Eugene gave her a warm smile. You handled it better than you think. Those words, so simple and genuine, struck something deep inside her. For the first time in a long time, someone made her feel capable, like she could actually stand on her own feet. Weeks went by, and Alyssa and Eugene gradually settled into a quiet rhythm of coexistence. He turned out to be disciplined, respectful, someone who kept his word. Alyssa even found herself beginning to trust him, a feeling she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. One evening, after she wrapped up a long workday, Eugene suggested they go out for a walk. Fresh air helps clear your mind, he said, slipping on his jacket. She hesitated but eventually agreed. They walked through the city at dusk, talking about nothing in particular. Alyssa was surprised by how calm she felt. When they reached a small cafe on the corner, Eugene stopped. Want to go in? My treat. She started to decline, but his offer was so casual, so unpressured, that she nodded instead. Over hot tea, Alyssa opened up. She told him how, when she was younger, she dreamed of leaving the city, starting over somewhere new. But she'd stayed because of Kevin. Do you regret it? Eugene asked gently. Alyssa paused, thinking. Not anymore, she said. Honestly, I think I'm glad things turned out the way they did. It forced me to look at myself differently. Eugene nodded without pressing further. Across the city, Kevin was simmering with frustration. He'd expected Alyssa to break down after their confrontation, to beg, to plead, to fall apart, but she hadn't. She had stood firm, and to him, that felt like a humiliation. She's doing this just to spite me, he muttered under his breath, staring out the window. But deep down, what really gnawed at him was something else. Alyssa had crossed a line, one he thought she'd never dare to cross. She'd shown strength, and that terrified him more than anything. His thoughts kept circling back to their last encounter. For a brief moment, he even considered trying to get her back, but then he pushed the thought away. She's not the same woman, he realized bitterly. She's gone. Time passed, and Alyssa began to reclaim a life that felt truly her own. Her days were no longer dictated by someone else's moods or demands. The apartment, once filled with silence and tension, came back to life. Music played again. Candles lit up her evenings. Flowers, ones she bought for herself, adorned the table. Eugene, still living in the spare room, had become something like a quiet constant, someone she could count on. They didn't interact constantly, but when they did, it was warm, easy. He didn't pry. He didn't try to fix anything, and somehow that gave her the space to simply be. One evening, Eugene got home late from work. Alyssa was already in her pajamas, ready to turn in for the night, when she heard the doorbell. She opened it to find him standing there, a takeout bag in one hand and an exhausted but content smile on his face. Sorry it's late, he said. I was hoping we could have dinner together. Alyssa looked at him, trying to understand what it was that motivated this man. He never asked for anything, never pressured her, never acted like she owed him something. It seemed like he simply enjoyed being present. Come in, she finally said, stepping aside. Over dinner, they talked about his upcoming work rotation, 2 months in the remote north, where snow and silence ruled. But you know what's funny, Eugene said, grinning. When I come back, even the simplest things feel new again. A warm shower, the sound of a quiet house. Alyssa listened, curious. She couldn't imagine such a transient life, but she liked hearing him talk about it. And you? He asked suddenly. Ever think about changing everything? I did, she admitted, many times. But I was always afraid. Eugene nodded as if he already knew. Everyone's afraid. he said softly. The question is, what do you do with that fear? A few more days passed, and then Eugene left for his work assignment. The apartment grew quiet again, but not in a way that felt lonely. Alyssa noticed something had changed. She didn't feel abandoned. Instead, she began to pay attention to the little things that brought her peace. The smell of fresh bread from the oven, the warmth of sunlight on her face, the sound of rain tapping against the windows. She wasn't filling silence with distraction anymore. She was letting it settle around her and learning to breathe inside it. One afternoon, while organizing the closet, she came across an old photo album. It had been tucked away and forgotten for years. As she flipped through the pages, she found pictures from her life before marriage. She stared at each image as if seeing them for the first time, her younger self, full of light and purpose. On one page, she stood on a bridge with her arms stretched wide, laughing into the wind like she was ready to fly. "Where did you go?" she whispered to the photo. That question lingered with her the rest of the evening. It wasn't sadness she felt. It was recognition. She realized she hadn't lost herself. She'd just stepped away for a while, and now it was time to come back. When Eugene returned weeks later, Alyssa greeted him at the door with a warmth and ease he hadn't seen before. "You look different," he said, genuinely surprised by the shift in her energy. "I think I've decided to come back to myself," she answered with a quiet smile. They sat down for tea, and she told him something she hadn't shared with anyone yet. She'd signed up for a photography course, something she had dreamed about for years but never dared to pursue. She even bought a new camera and started taking pictures again. "That's amazing," Eugene said sincerely. "You've earned this." "Thank you," she replied softly, her voice filled with something new, conviction. Their conversations returned to the same relaxed rhythm as before, but now there was an undercurrent of something deeper. Life wasn't just moving on, it was evolving. Eugene had become not just a roommate or a supporter, but someone who believed in her without needing anything in return. Meanwhile, Kevin was still trying to piece his life back together. The young woman he'd left Alyssa for had long since moved on. The money he got from selling his share of the apartment had disappeared quickly. More often than not, his thoughts drifted to the past, but not with longing. What he felt now was pure frustration. The power he thought he had was gone. The control he once held over Alyssa had crumbled. One day, he saw her by chance at the mall. She was carrying shopping bags, walking with lightness in her step, confident. Next to her was Eugene. They were laughing at something, sharing a joke only they understood. Her laughter sounded completely unfamiliar to Kevin, free and joyful. He started to approach them, maybe to say something smug or cutting, but stopped. They didn't even notice him. It was like he no longer existed in their world. That realization hit harder than he expected. Alyssa, on the other hand, never looked back. She had finally built a life that felt authentic. Eugene became her closest friend, and eventually something more than that. On the wall of their apartment hung a photo she had taken, a self-portrait, standing once again on a bridge, arms wide open, face toward the wind. It was a reminder of how far she had come and how vital it is to stop being afraid of the future.